Thank you for tuning into another video from JRM Recaps. Spoilers ahead. The film starts in the city of Prague, Czech Republic, where James Bond has found an MI6 division chief, Dryden, who has been selling data to enemies for benefit. They talk about the skills required to be a 00 agent. One of the necessities is making 2 affirmed kills, and Bond nonchalantly lets Dryden know that his espionage contact, Fisher, has died. Intercut with the discussion are scenes of Bond and Dryden fighting in a men's bathroom. Bond at last drives the man's face into a sink overflowing with water and holds him there until he drowns. Dryden aims a weapon at Bond. He pulls the trigger, yet James has taken the bullets out from the gun. Dryden keeps on provoking Bond, asking whether he felt any regret or responsibility over killing Fisher. Bond stays unresponsive, his face showing no emotion as he shoots and kills Dryden. In flashback, Fisher recuperates from Bond's endeavor to drown him and gets his gun. The frame immediately moves to the series' famous gun barrel sequence as Bond twirls around and shoots Fisher. Blood running down the frame, then showing the opening titles. In Bale, Uganda, a gathering of freedom fighters, run by Stephen Obanno, are organizing a get-together with Chiffre, a confidential broker to terrorist groups all over the planet. Obanno isn't certain about whether or not to entrust Chiffre with his cash, but rather Mr. White, the man handling the gathering, makes sense that he's just the person making the introduction. Not too long after, an escort of Land Rovers show up, one of which conveys Chiffre. Chiffre makes sense to Obanno that he invested their cash in maneuver stocks so they get a 100% profit from the investment. Obanno consents to permit the cash to be taken for Chiffre's wicked purposes. While Obanno's cash is being stacked into Chiffre's vehicles, Chiffre calls his stockbroker in London and has him short sell countless numbers of Skyfleet stocks, despite the merchant cautioning him that he's wagering against the market and all forecasts are predicting Skyfleet stocks to go up in worth. In Madagascar, Bond, on his opening assignment as a 00, is working with another agent, Carter, doing observation on a terrorist, Malaka, who is betting on a match between a mongoose and a cobra. Carter, Bond's amateur associate, is uncovered after Malaka gets a phone call and the terrorist runs away from the scene. Bond pursues the man who leads him through a building site onto a few sky cranes, then lastly through the Namibia embassy where he looks for shelter. Bond races into the consulate, in direct contradiction of international law and his orders, and gets Malaka in the ambassador's office. Bond hauls him along, moving through the corridors of the embassy, then tossing the man through a window and into a plaza. He unexpectedly winds up encompassed by armed watchmen. The ambassador shows up and orders Bond to let Malaka go. Bond shoots the terrorist in a nearby fuel tank and escapes in the blast. He likewise takes the bag Malaka was conveying. Looking through the bag, he finds a bomb and Malaka's mobile phone. Bond inspects the bomber's messages quickly, seeing one with an American telephone number and ellipsis. Bond holds onto the telephone. Back at MI6, M is angry that 007's aggressive activities were recorded at the Namibia embassy. Bond later breaks into M's house and hacks her top-level access so he can follow where the phone call started from. At the point when M enters, she's surprised and addresses him on proper engagement and behavior, expressing it might have been a slip-up to elevate him to 00 status. She likewise advises him to go on a short getaway until she can conclude how best to manage him. Bond has found that the call to Malaka began at a fancy oceanside hotel in the Bahamas. Bond goes there to examine who originated the call and why. He winds up finding a middleman, Alex Dimitrios, who is a thug utilized by Chiffre, recruited to find somebody who could complete a job for him. Bond meets Dimitrios and plays poker with him, beating him and winning his 1964 Aston Martin DB5. Bond utilizes the Aston to manage an intimate night with Dimitrios' scorned spouse, Solange, to get info about her significant other. She lets Bond know that Dimitrios is going to be traveling to Miami. Bond follows him there where he approaches Dimitrios at the Body World's display. He sees him check a bag with the coat check employees and furthermore placed a claim label in one of the showcases. Bond kills Dimitrios when he's held at knife point, but the bag disappears and Bond follows the man, Carlos, recruited as Malacca's last-minute substitution. Bond tails Carlos to Miami International Airport, where he grabs a security uniform out of the bag and slips it on. He sneaks into the secured part of the air terminal and Bond follows him, having sorted out ellipsis was the security code to get past the locked door. M calls Bond to let him know Le Chiffre will have Carlos obliterate a prototype jetliner for an enormous airline named Skyfleet. The prototype is the biggest traveler airplane on the planet, and annihilating it will bankrupt Skyfleet. Carlos sets off the emergency sprinkler system in the structure to cause a diversion and gets out onto the landing area. Carlos connects an explosive charge to a large refueling truck after executing the driver and begins driving it towards the plane. But Bond figures out how to jump onto the gas truck. The two have a brutal battle around the runways while being pursued by the Miami-Dade police. At last, Carlos jumps off the truck, and Bond is barely able to prevent the gas truck from crashing into the airplane. Carlos grins as Bond is captured by the police and initiates the charge. But Bond has previously found Carlos's little explosive device and connected it to his belt during the skirmish, and Carlos winds up committing suicide. Bond smiles a bit after the blast. On the telephone, Le Chiffre gets word that Carlos fell short and Dimitrios was killed. He believes that somebody talked and thwarted his plot. Returning to Nassau, Bond finds that Solange had been tortured, killed, and propped up in a lounge. M explains she was tortured and killed by Le Chiffre on the grounds that she was the last person alive and he thought she talked. Le Chiffre's scheme was to short sell millions of dollars in Skyfleet stock and, in wrecking their prototype, make their stock plunge and send them into liquidation so he could repurchase the shares at a less expensive amount. Because of Bond, Le Chiffre has lost more than $101.2 million. Presently a marked man, Le Chiffre needs to figure out a different way to acquire the cash back so his financial backers won't kill him. M lets Bond know that Le Chiffre just set up a high-stakes Texas Hold'em poker game at the Club Royale in Montenegro for 10 players, with an entry fee at $10 million a person in addition to a $5 million repurchase should they lose all their cash. M organizes to put Bond in the game as a swap for a syndicate member, since he's the premier poker player in MI6. M likewise has a location gadget put into Bond's left wrist so she can follow him anywhere. The British government will provide the cash and, while Bond is on the train to Montenegro, he is met by a young lady named Vesper Lynd, a Treasury agent who has been shipped off to monitor Bond and give a go or no-go if he loses all the cash. They chat over supper, Vesper remarking on his cold nature and Bond commenting on how Vesper is retentive. After showing up they act like a wedded couple, with Bond acting like an expert poker player named Arlington Beach and Vesper as Stephanie Broadchest, a name that Vesper is insulted by. They meet with Renee Mathis, their contact in Montenegro, who explains that Le Chiffre presumably doesn't have the slightest idea that he's under observation because the only individual watching him is Mathis himself. He's invested in re-establishing former connections with people like the local police chief, whom Mathis has already set up to have arrested on bribery charges. Before the game starts, Bond likewise buys a profound purple revealing dress for Vesper to wear, to bring about a distraction during the game. He is irritated that Vesper has given him a tuxedo that seems to have been customized and is of a higher quality than Bond's own. That night, he heads to the club in the private parlor, where he is acquainted with different players there, including Le Chiffre. A delegate from the club, and one more delegate from a worldwide bank, explain that every player has given $10 million for their initial buy-in. The repurchase expense of $5 million can be made by electronic exchange. Their cash is being held in a Swiss bank account for the entire game and everyone has their own password to keep the cash secured. At the finish of the competition, the champion will enter his password into an encrypted keypad, which will accordingly wire the cash to any financial account in the world of the victor's choice. Vesper has the account number, however just Bond knows the password. On the opening hand, Bond purposely makes a misconstrued decision to sort out how Le Chiffre bluffs. His physical tell includes him putting his left hand on his face close to his injured left eye, but Vesper isn't by any stretch of the imagination intrigued, thinking Bond is incompetent. After an extended round of hands, a break is called. Bond puts a GPS beacon in Le Chiffre's asthma inhaler and brings Vesper back to their room. Le Chiffre is summoned back to his room by his girlfriend, Valenka. But he is stopped by Abano and his right-hand man, insisting on his cash back. They threaten to remove Valenka's arm, but Le Chiffre doesn't submit. Out in the corridor, Bond hears Valenka shouting. He rapidly snatches Vesper and they kiss in the stairway entryway to cover themselves. However, Abano's partner in crime sees Bond's earpiece and assaults them both. The battle brings them into the flight of stairs, where the thug is tossed off the stairs to his demise, and James and Abano have a no-holds-barred brawl right down the flight of stairs, Abano using a machete. At last arriving on the base, Bond gets Abano into a stranglehold. Abano attempts to go after Bond's gun, yet Vesper smashes it out of his hands. Bond at last kills Abano and tells Vesper to contact Mathis, who sets up one of Le Chiffre's partners to accept any consequence for the dead bodies by putting them in the man's vehicle trunk. Bond completes the poker session, however he gets back to the room to find Vesper completely dressed and shaking in the shower from the battle. He clutches her and soothes her. The following day, during the poker game, Bond loses all his cash to Le Chiffre in the wake of misreading a bluff and tells Vesper that he committed an error. Vesper won't give him the repurchase cash, saying he will lose it. Irate, Bond pursues Le Chiffre yet is stopped by one of the other players, Felix Leiter, the CIA's agent shipped off to the poker match to get Le Chiffre for similar reasons MI6 has sent Bond. Leiter tells 007 that he's doing bad himself in the poker game and that he'll back Bond to return to the game. Leiter thinks that Bond can beat Le Chiffre. Consequently, Bond will hand over Le Chiffre to the CIA. Yet again Bond gradually raises his bank once more and turns into a danger to Le Chiffre. Le Chiffre has Valenka poison in Bond's martini with digitalis, making Bond experience cardiac arrest. Bond stumbles to his vehicle, and speaking with clinical experts at MI6 base camp, is going to utilize the defibrillator when he sees the link isn't connected and drops. Vesper shows up, fixes the defibrillator and shocks him back to life. Shaken, however ready to walk, Bond gets back to the game. The last hand of the game is down to 4 players, including Bond and Le Chiffre, who go all in, wagering the rest of their cash, driving the pot above and beyond $120 million. One player has a flush, while another has a full house. Le Chiffre has a higher full house and is going to win the hand when Bond discovers he has a straight flush and wins the match. Bond has supper with Vesper, who gets a call from Mathis expressing that Le Chiffre has been arrested by the CIA. Vesper leaves the dining hall area. Seconds after, Bond understands she's at serious risk. Vesper is abducted by Le Chiffre. Bond races after them in his Aston Martin, yet needs to swerve when he sees Vesper lying bound in the street. The vehicle rolls a few times, wrecking it. Le Chiffre and his associates take him, taking out his homing device. As Bond fades from consciousness, Le Chiffre lets him know that Mathis was aligned with his enemy. Bond and Vesper are taken to a closed-by ship and split up. Bond is stripped and tied to a chair with the seat eliminated, allowing his male genitalia to stay uncovered. Le Chiffre utilizes a big rope with a tied knot at the end, striking Bond's testicles, ordering the password for the bank account the winnings have been placed in. Bond declines, regardless of Le Chiffre's intentions to kill him and Vesper. Through the torture imposed on him, Bond tells Le Chiffre that his financial backers, who are as of now hunting him, will track him down and kill him. Le Chiffre counters, saying that regardless of whether he kills Bond and Vesper, that MI6 will welcome him as a result of the information he has about his terrorist clients. Le Chiffre at long last draws a blade and is going to castrate Bond when shots are heard outside, suggested to be the sound of Valenka being murdered. The entryway opens and in strolls Mr. White, the merchant who acquainted Abano with Le Chiffre, pointing a silenced handgun straight at Le Chiffre. Le Chiffre, suddenly scared, begs to him, saying he'll get the cash, to which White answers, "Money isn't as important to our organization as knowing who to trust." White then, at that point, lethally shoots Le Chiffre in the head. Bond awakens in a hospital bed with confusion while he recuperates. After he completely recovers consciousness, he speaks with Mathis, whom he thinks was responsible for his and Vesper's capture by Chiffre. MI6 agents show up, hit Mathis with a taser and drag him away. Vesper goes to see Bond and they admit their affection for one another. The Swiss broker responsible for the winning account visits and Bond gives Vesper the password to enter, which is her first name. Bond quits MI6 to go on vacation with Vesper, and they sail to Venice, Italy, where Vesper says she'll get the cash and Bond will get the provisions for the outing. At the point when M telephones 007 about his retirement, she says that they'll talk about that later. However, they need to discuss the cash being brought back to the British government first, which warns Bond that Vesper was taking advantage of him from the start. Bond follows Vesper to a mystery meeting where she turns the cash over to a man named Gettler, who spots Bond close by. Gettler and a couple of his men retreat to a structure under construction and a gunfight results. Bond shoots and cracks the buoyancy packs that hold the structure above water level and kills the men. He attempts to save Vesper, trapped in an old elevator, however can't after she ends it all by drowning herself. Bond retrieves her body and takes her above water, however can't bring her back to life. Mr. White, who'd been watching the scene, is seen leaving with the case with all the cash. Sitting on the boat he and Vesper had been traveling on, Bond converses with M, who tells him that Vesper had a boyfriend who was being held by Chiffre's association. She had planned to take care of Chiffre's partners with the cash to get him freed. M thinks that there are no further leads, that the trail has gone cold. Bond inspects Vesper's telephone and finds the mobile number of Mr. White, which he speculates she left for him intentionally. At Lake Como in northern Italy, White shows up at a rich manor. After he leaves his vehicle, he gets a call from somebody letting him know they need to talk. Asking who the caller is, White is out of nowhere shot in the leg by a sniper. He tumbles to the ground and creeps agonizingly toward the house. As he attempts to climb the steps and the Bond theme music starts to play, Bond seems to be carrying a mobile phone and a silenced HK rifle. As White gazes upward defiantly, Bond says the name's Bond. James Bond. The end titles begin to roll right away. Thank you for watching our recap. If you enjoyed this video, please be sure to hit the thumbs up button and subscribe for future videos. Also, try some of our other videos displayed on screen.